Hi, in this video, we're going to look at Massachusetts Rules of Court, including the rules of professional conduct and Massachusetts Law of Evidence, and how you would find those sources on Westlaw and Lexis. So the first thing we're going to do is start on Westlaw, and we're going to browse to statutes, because as you know from the reading and from the prior video, when you're looking for court rules, they're located with the statutory material. Okay, so I've browsed to the Massachusetts page on Westlaw, and I'm just going to scroll down, and you'll see that the categories are actually called, you might not have noticed it before, but statutes and court rules. And I'm just going to click on the larger category so that we can see all the court rules that are available. And the statutes are at the top, and after the list of the statutes, the Constitution and all the different parts of the statute, we start seeing all the different court rules. Here we have the ones that are of more general applicability, so they apply to more than one court, the rules of civil procedure, criminal procedure, and appellate procedure. And then we start seeing the rules and supplemental orders, guidelines, those types of things of the individual courts underneath. And if you kind of scroll with me, if it doesn't make you seasick, you can see that there's quite a number of sources available here. You can check the boxes. So if you wanted to check the Massachusetts Rules of Civil Procedure as well as the rules for the Superior Court, you could check these boxes and run your search here. But I'm just going to use a browse approach to show you the rules and what they look like on Westlaw. So let's look at the Massachusetts Rules of Civil Procedure. Okay, the first thing that I want to mention is that all of these rules, usually in the beginning part here, have some kind of scope note. So if you're not sure which court the Massachusetts Rules of Civil Procedure apply to, you can look at the rule that has to do with the scope, and it tells you exactly which rules and if there's only certain actions it applies to in some courts, which courts those are. Okay, so there's a few definitions in this beginning section as well. Let's go back to the outline. And the next rule I want to look at is Rule 7, which is a rule that has to do with the pleadings. And we're going to look at what types of pleadings are allowed and what the form of the motion is. And you can see that when we get here, there's just some features I want to show you. We're getting the text of the rules. Some of them are quite long. This one's not so long, but some of them are very long. We're getting highlights to other rules that are mentioned as well as the statutory provisions. One thing you're always going to want to check with whatever source you're in, whether it be rules, statutes, regulations, is how current is this database. And if we look and we click on the currency link, we can see that it's current through amendments that have been received through January 15th, at least as I'm doing the video today. So you just want to be careful because that's 2 months ago. So if there's been any new amendments, it's not going to be shown in this rule. Now you don't have amendments with rules as frequently as you do with regulations or statutes, but it's just something to always be aware of, is how current is the database you're looking in, how current are these rules. The next thing I wanted to show you is that just like when we're looking at statutes, this is an annotated version of this rule. So we're getting up here the different key citing results, but we're also getting the notes of decisions, just like we would get on Westlaw for statutes. These are the ones that have been chosen by the editors and the ones that would appear in the print publication. So they're decisions, cases that have discussed this statute in depth. In addition, we get some history information about the statute, and we have the citing references just like we would with a statutory provision. So case law that's interpreted this particular rule, as well as some references to secondary source material, which could be helpful, practical law company, when it's been mentioned in filings that have been filed with the court, those types of things. So those are just some of the features I wanted you to notice when you're looking at the rules. You get not just the text, but all those nice editorial features on both Westlaw and Lexis. And let's go back and just give an example of one of the trial courts. Here we're going to look for the rule of the Superior Court, Rule 9A, civil motions. Before we look at the rules of the Superior Court, I just want you to notice that there are other sources of law here as well. So there's particular rules governing, for example, persons who are authorized to admit to bail out of court, guidelines, and also standing orders. So these are all court rules or other types of guidance given by the Superior Court that you might be asked to do research on. So let's take a look at those rules of the Superior Court. And as I mentioned, we're going to look at Rule 9A, civil motions. And so I just wanted to remind you that in addition to the general rules of civil procedure in Massachusetts, different court rules like the Superior Court could have rules on point for motion practice for that court, okay? And you can see that as when we looked at the Mass rules on civil procedure, there's notes of decisions in this version and also citing references, so cases and other sources that have cited to this particular rule. One thing I wanted to remind you about is a lot of these sources, like statutes and some secondary source material, regulations, they often have a table of contents feature on Westlaw or Lexis that can be helpful if you're wondering are there other rules that might be applicable. So you're interested in civil motions, you can open up the table of contents and you can see that, oh, certificate of service, I might need to look at that rule as well. If I need to worry about something that is being served, I might also need to, I'm interested in civil motions, but I might need to look at this more general Rule 9 on motions. So always remember when you're in a statute or rules or even a secondary source, open up that table of contents link and see if there are other applicable sections that might be worth taking a look at for your research. Okay, I just wanted to remind you again that the rules of professional conduct are contained in the SJC rules. And so let's take a quick look at that. We need to go out back to the main screen. Here we go. And we're going to look at the SJC rules, which are towards the top. And here they are here, the rules of the Supreme Judicial Court. You have to open these up, and then you're getting a lot of rules, general rules here, which you might also need to do research in. And finally, we're going to get down to Rule 307, and these are the rules of professional conduct and comments. You can open these up and you see you have different, as I mentioned, all the categories that you maybe studied in professional responsibility. Just take a look at one of these rules, and I wanted to mention that you do have the ability to key cite these rules. So let's look at Rule 1.14, which has to do with clients with diminished capacity. And so you're getting the text of the rule itself, when a client has capacity or not, when it's diminished, and what's the attorney's responsibility. You get a note as to when it was amended, when it was adopted, I'm sorry, and when the most recent amendments were. And then you're getting under the editor's notes, all the comments that are accompanying the rule. So that gives you some idea. It's not binding, the comments are not binding, but it gives you an idea of the interpretation of the rule. So it gives you a little bit more information about how it might be interpreted. Okay, and I mentioned you also getting here citing references. So this can be a way to look for cases that have interpreted this rule. It's a lot easier on Westlaw for rules of professional conduct than it is on Lexis, and I'll show you that when we look at Lexis. Okay, I just also wanted to show you that with these court rules, we can also find, this is where that SJC, Massachusetts Guide to Evidence, is on Westlaw. So if you scroll all the way kind of towards the bottom, you'll see right here, this is the Massachusetts Guide to Evidence. And here it has all the different sections, and you can take a look at some of the categories: judicial notice, relevancy, privilege, those types of issues are all covered in the Massachusetts Guide to Evidence. Let's talk a little bit about what secondary sources we could find on Westlaw that might be helpful for rules practice or evidentiary issues. So let's go back and just browse into secondary source materials. And we can look at all the Massachusetts secondary sources. And under text and treatises, one of the things I mentioned to you was Massachusetts practice. In your reading, they mentioned the Massachusetts proof of cases. The trial handbook could also be helpful for some of these issues. In terms of the CLE materials, there's a number of different CLE materials that could be helpful. And I mentioned a few in the slideshow, but if you look under criminal law, there's some things that are here that would be helpful for procedural issues as well as substantive issues of law. And also general practice. Here's that ethical lawyering in Massachusetts I mentioned. And finally, I just wanted to mention under litigation, a lot of these could be helpful for rules practice or evidentiary issues. For example, here again is the Massachusetts Guide to Evidence, there's Massachusetts Superior Court Practice Manuals, there's the Pocket Guide to Evidence. So lots of secondary source material that could be helpful for you here as well. One thing only available on Westlaw for secondary sources are the key rule sources, the key rule source. So this is a source that it contains an outline of applicable rules of practice, and it has things like timing requirements, filing requirements, hearing information checklists. So this could be really helpful for practice in the Superior Court. Just a couple of other sources, and I'm going to mention this just by doing an all content search and typing in the name of the source that I wanted to talk about are the ABA ethics materials, and I'm going to get to them. I just start typing and then I get to the database that I want, ABA ethics materials. And here you're going to find the annotated model rules of professional conduct. So this is a source that's actually annotated. So this is a great way to get to that annotated model rules if you want to look at annotations that might be slightly different than what we have in Massachusetts, but could be helpful for interpretation. And also here are those ABA ethics opinions that I mentioned. So again, anything by the ABA isn't binding authority in Massachusetts, but it could be helpful for interpretation. So finally, I just wanted to mention that you do have a version of the Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly available to you on Westlaw. And this is the source that I mentioned to you that could be helpful for updating court rules. And I'm going to just run a search here, court rule, then the same sentence as amend with an exclamation point, just to give you a sense. Yes, I did mean that. And you can see here we're getting an amendment to the Boston Municipal Court rules, an order on specialty sessions, a change to a rule of professional conduct, etc. So since this video is getting kind of long, I'm going to break here and we'll do a separate, shorter video on the sources on Lexis.